Okay, hello guys. It's the last part of our beautiful, wonderful, much loved Fire and Blood series. I am so excited to be done talking about this book. I had two parts talking about the timeline and the family tree of Fire and Blood. I felt like there were so many more things that I wanted to say about the book and even about the show that I just did not have the chance to say at all. But they wouldn't fit in the second part. So this is like my review of the book. I don't know how many stars I would give this book. I guess 3. It's my first George R.R. Martin, so it's really hard to, I know that this isn't meant to be the book that you read first. That's not really something you're supposed to do. It was dry. It was boring. It was way too long. I was feeling like I don't need to know every single thing about every single character. Like, there are people in here who are not important, but since it was like from a historian's perspective, they just had to tell everything. I'm thinking, like, give us a break. We don't need to hear every single thing, all right? By the way, do you like my curtains? So, a few notes about the show. I said this before in one of my, in one of the first 2 parts of this video, but shows cannot be written like the book was written. The book is its own thing. If they made it exactly like the book, nobody would watch it because it wouldn't be interesting at all. Like I said, there's no protagonist, there's no antagonist. It's just telling the story. I don't know why House of the Dragons started where it started. Maybe because Dance of the Dragons is what is important to Game of Thrones, and they felt like the rest of the story that was before that wasn't so important. But Rhaenyra is not good. Rhaenyra is not the protagonist. Rhaenyra is not like somebody that you're like rooting for in the books, really. Like, yeah, she is the rightful heir. It was her father's plan that she be the heir and she become queen. So in that sense, she should become queen and she should fight for that. But it's not like the other guys had no claim to the throne. It was law that the males did have more claim to the throne. So, I mean, she was more Targaryen, like more percentage Targaryen than her half-brothers were. They made her seem like she was like so cool and so, you know, in the right, and so it was like righteous fury, but it wasn't so much of that in the book. I prefer her over Alicent, but realistically, this book did make me feel less like I had like favorite characters like I did in the show. And they did give Daemon like kind of an arc a little bit. I mean, him falling in love with Rhaenyra is not really like an arc, but you're like, oh yes, they got together kind of in the show, where he was like really a bad guy and he did a lot of bad things, like legitimately bad things, and he was just as bad if not worse in the books, and he was never really redeemed in any way. I mean, he did marry Rhaenyra and they like supposedly loved each other or whatever, but he was just another one of the dudes. He wasn't like bad boy with a heart of gold. No heart of gold. He does not have a heart of gold. The other part that did not exist in the book was in the movie. They had this whole subplot, kind of really important part of the plot, which was that Aegon's true successor would, and this lost me. I was like questioning my friends about it because I was not getting it. Like, I was not understanding what this meant, but there was something that the true king would tell his successor, and only the kings and his successor knew this thing, and only Aegon's true successors knew this thing. And Rhaenyra was told this by her dad. Then they made this like misunderstanding, like Alicent heard him maybe say that Aegon, her son, should be king, but really he was not saying that. But that didn't happen at all in the books. And I mean, once again, it's like we don't really know because they were the only 2 people in the room, and the historian doesn't, can't tell those kinds of things. So that's what's frustrating too, is it's like the book isn't really taking liberties because all of these things could have happened because the historian wasn't there, or the historian didn't have ears there or whatever, eyes there. So it's frustrating that they're able to take these liberties and just, we don't really have a choice of saying like, that didn't happen. But it was not depicted in the book. It was never depicted in the book that there's some thing that, you know, kings would tell their successor, would tell their successor, would tell their successor. And so in the show, Rhaenyra had even more of a claim to the throne, because it was like, no, he meant for her to be queen, truly, even though he had sons that were grown up at this point when he died. And she didn't have that. Her claim to the throne was that she was crowned heir when she was young, before her brothers were born, and that's it. Also, Alicent mishearing him and thinking that he meant Aegon makes it almost makes her not the bad guy, which in that case she was definitely the bad guy, because she knew that Rhaenyra was, you know, heir to the throne, and she went against his wishes purposefully. Whereas in the show, she was seemingly carrying out what she thought was truly his wish. So I guess they give her a little bit more morally gray area in that sense. So it's not quite so like, obviously Rhaenyra is in the right and Alicent is the bad guy. They maybe tried to make it a little bit more gray for both of the characters in that sense. Also, Kristen Cole helping her and having the idea of like, I mean, he's like the devil in her ear. I mean, he's much worse in the books than he was in the show, and he was like pretty bad in the show. But I think they tried to make it seem like, he was maybe like the guy for a little while. However, also, she did not sleep with him. He never broke his vow. He was very serious about not breaking his vow. So then when he propositioned her and she was like, I'm literally heir to the throne, I cannot run away with you. And he was like, oh, then he's her enemy. It's like, well, that doesn't make that much sense, because he's King's guard. He should know how important this is to her, and he should respect that. So that frustrated me. His character was a little bit like I'm assuming they're trying to make some people root for him. I did not like him. I will say it was a huge... So it's interesting how the beginning of the show starts at about 50% of the book. And that starts with Viserys. So Viserys and then Rhaenyra and then pretty much her kid. That's just 3 generations. And it ends there. So the first 50% is like 5 or 6 generations. And the second 50% is just those 3 generations. And it ends when Aegon turns 16. So he wasn't even like his whole life. It just ended when he was 16. So it was like 2.5 generations. The story just dragged and dragged. It went on talking about other things for so long. And I was like, I'm not getting it. I am so done with this story. I am so done with this. The fact that it was written like a history book, there was none of this naturalness. It was like the whole time. I mean, yeah, Dance of Dragons are interesting, cool. But it wasn't like you were in there with all the action, like seeing dragons die. It was like, no, so-and-so died and such, and then it talks about forever, like where everyone was when this happened, and then like what so-and-so's reaction was to this happening, but you're not in it like that. So when it gets to around the very end of Dance of Dragons, when Rhaenyra and Aegon the second are like in it, and then he ends up killing her. After that, it's like, okay, to me that's kind of like natural conclusion. It should have been like shortly wrapped up her death and Aegon's regency, and then the end. But no, it just went on and on and on and on. And I know that he's planning on writing a second of these books, supposedly, possibly named Blood and Fire. Now I see why people are like really having it with him. Like, I've already had it with him, and it was just one book. Enough. Like, we get it. You want it to be a real story, like a real history. I was into it the first, like, 60%. I was into it. Like, it was interesting. It was compelling. I was really getting into it. Then it just dragged. There were so many stories that branched off that were like, you zone out for a second and then you zone back in and you're like, who the heck are they talking about? Because it would make no connection. He would branch off talking about somebody's sibling and just like go on and on and on and on and on, much into the future. And then he'd be like, but back to this guy. And then he would go on and on. And it was like, I'm not tracking all of this. And I know it's like, I just read that book, like, I guess I finished it like 2 weeks ago, but I'm tired of reading. I have no interest in any books right now. In fact, I picked up like 4 books and started them and been like, ugh. I simply can't trust authors anymore. Dare I say I wish I hadn't have read this book? I don't know. It was a fine reading experience, but I found myself so frustrated by the time that it ended that even though I'm like, yay, I like know the family tree and I can really explain it to somebody and I'll know what's happening in the next season if I even watch it, which I'm definitely not going to watch Game of Thrones. It's been a long time. The hype is over. Everybody already knows about the ending. I have no interest in watching it, and I now have no interest in reading it either. I know. It's different. They're different books. It's like a totally different story. It's a totally different writing style. I'm done. Okay? So I just want to say it was not my favorite reading experience. It took a very long time, but that wasn't the problem. I've read so many long books that I really enjoyed. That's all I have to say about that. It was a little ranty. I apologize. On to some better books. I'm really trying to find something that I'm gonna super enjoy. I'm trying to read some like really light romance, just something funny, rom-coms, I don't know, because I'm depressed, guys. I'm simply depressed.